It's music theory. Online, let's learn some theory. Online, by watching modules. Online, with music theory. Online.
Hi everybody. Welcome to Module 7 of our theory class. How did you do with grouping of your notes last week? Hopefully it makes sense, and the more you do it, the easier it will become. We're going to keep working on time, and today we're going to talk about rests and how we group rests together in simple time. One of the most basic things to remember is that you must complete one beat at a time. When you look at your whole measure of music, the whole measure of music must add up to the number of beats that are indicated by the time signature. It's always best to begin with the smallest rest first when you're completing a beat, and then complete each part of the beat going to the next largest rest. In the example on your screen, you can see we're in 2/4 time. So we have a quarter note, which is getting one beat, and then an eighth note, which is getting a half a beat. So what we need to complete that measure is an eighth rest. In the second measure, we have a quarter note, which gets one beat, and then a 16th note. We always start from the smallest rest first, so we have to have a 16th rest, and then an eighth rest. If you put the eighth rest first and then the 16th rest, it would be wrong. It has to be the smallest rest first, which is the 16th rest. When you're in quadruple time, which means that you're in 4/4 or 4/8 or even 4/2, you can join beats 1 and 2 together, and you can join beats 3 and 4 together, but you can never, ever, ever, ever join the second and the third beats together. In the example on your screen, we have a quarter note, so it makes sense to have a quarter rest. Then you would use a half rest. So what you're really doing when you're in quadruple time is you're dividing that measure of music into two halves. To write 2 quarter rests would be wrong. You would want to write a half rest because you need a rest for half of the measure. In the second example in 4/8 time, it's the same thing. You have an eighth note and then an eighth rest. Then you would have a quarter rest for the last 2 beats in the measure. Remember what I said? You can join beats 1 and 2 together, and you can join beats 3 and 4 together, but you can never join beats 2 and 3 together. In the example on your screen, the first incorrect example is joining beats 2 and 3 together. You can't do that. Here's an example of when you would have to write 2 quarter rests. When you're in triple time, make sure that you use separate rests for each beat. Sometimes you can group beats 1 and 2 together, and on the slide it says it's acceptable later. For now, you want to show each beat. It's better to use 2 quarter rests. In the second line, we have a quarter note. You cannot use a half rest. You must use 2 quarter rests. Anytime you have a whole measure rest, you always use a whole rest. It doesn't matter if you're in 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 2/8, 4/8, anything. You always use a whole rest for a whole measure of music. When you have a dot placed immediately after a note, that dot increases the length of that note by half of its original value. Sounds a little confusing, doesn't it? If you have a dotted whole note, that's equal to a whole note plus half of a whole note, which is a half note. So that means you would hold a dotted whole note for a whole note plus a half note. A dotted half note would be equal to a half note plus half of that, which is a quarter note. A dotted quarter note is equal to a quarter note plus half of the quarter note, which is an eighth note. And a dotted eighth note is equal to an eighth note plus half of an eighth note, which is the 16th note. When you draw the dot, always make sure that it's in the space to the right of the note head. If you write it on the line, you won't be able to see the dot, so the dot always has to be in the space. Here's some examples of music that has dots in it. I'm going to play the first line and I'm going to count it. In the first line, you'll see that you have quarter notes with dots, dotted quarter notes. So they're equal to 1.5 beats. Sounds like this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. In the next example, in 4/4 time, you see dotted half notes, and they're going to get 3 beats. It's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In the next example, we have dotted eighth notes, and it's in 4/8 time, so that means that the dot is getting half a beat. It sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. A tie is a curved line that joins two note heads of the same pitch together. It must be the same pitch for it to be a tie. If it's not the same pitch, then it's a slur. The second note of a tied note is not resounded. It's held. So your tied note is being held for the combined value of both of the notes. In this example on this slide, you can see that there's circles all around this page. Those circles are showing you where each beat is. So you see the circle on the G, and then the dot is circled, and it's circled with the eighth note. That's because the dot and the eighth note equal 1 beat. Then we've got the G and the E, they each get a beat. Then we have our F, but the dot and the eighth note are circled together because that's 1 beat. This is showing you really beat circles. I'm going to play this for you. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we have to add rests. Remember, when we add rests, we always start with the smallest rest value and move to the larger rest value, but we also must complete each beat. So in the first example, what's given is an eighth note at the beginning and an eighth note at the end. So we look at our first eighth note and we must complete that beat. So in order to complete the first beat, we need an eighth rest. Then we have an eighth note at the end. So in order to complete the last beat, we need another eighth rest. So that gives us our first beat and our fourth beat. Remember, when you're in 4/4 time, you could never join 2 and 3 together. So therefore, we need to put 2 quarter rests. In our next measure, we have 4/16 notes, which give us our first beat, 4/16 notes, which give us our fourth beat, and we can't join 2 and 3 together, so you're going to use a quarter rest and a quarter rest in the middle. For the third beat, we have a quarter note first, and then we have a dot. And remember, the dot is equal to half of the original value of the note. So that means the dot is worth an eighth note. So that means we have a quarter note, which is 1 beat. The eighth note is half a beat. We have to finish that beat. So we would have to use an eighth rest. That would give us our first beat as a quarter note. The dot and the eighth rest give us our second beat. The third beat is the quarter note, and then for the fourth beat, it would be a quarter rest. Remember the rule that if it's a whole measure of rest, you must use a whole measure rest. Let's look at the second line. It's starting with an eighth note. So we need an eighth rest. I wrote an eighth note instead of an eighth rest. It should be an eighth rest. So that eighth note and eighth rest would equal one beat. And then the second beat is the quarter note. That's all you need was an eighth rest there. For the second measure, the two eighth notes equal one beat, and then you have an eighth note separate. That's the first of the second beat. All you need to add is an eighth rest. Then you have two eighth notes. That's equal to one beat. You could use a quarter rest for the second beat. In the last measure, there's a couple of answers. One of the answers would be to put an eighth rest in the first bracket. The eighth rest in the eighth note would equal one beat. Then you could put a quarter rest for the last two beats. In the third line, it starts with an eighth note. That's your first beat. And since we're in 3/8 time, you're best to write two eighth rests for 1, 2, 3. In the second measure, you would do the same thing. You would write two eighth rests, 1 and 2, and then the eighth note gives you your third beat. Remember, when it's a whole measure rest, you write a whole measure rest. So for the third measure, you're going to write a whole rest. And the last measure would be an eighth rest. Now let's look at the last line. We're in 3/4 time, and we have two quarter notes already. So what you're going to start with is a quarter rest. In the second measure, you have a quarter note at the end, so what you're going to put under the bracket would be two quarter rests. In the third measure, you'd have a quarter rest and then an eighth rest, because the eighth rest and the eighth note equal one beat, and then you've got another beat with a quarter note. So that quarter rest would be your first beat, eighth rest and eighth note is your second beat, and quarter note is your third beat. And in the last bracket, you're starting with an eighth note, so you would have an eighth rest. That would give you one beat. And then your second beat would be a quarter rest, and your third beat would be a quarter rest. One of the things that you see in simple time is triplets. A triplet is three notes that you're playing in the time of two. When you see triplets, it will always have a number 3 written, either above it or below it. You could have triplet eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, and they'd always be beamed together. If you have triplet half notes or triplet quarter notes, they, of course, wouldn't have a beam. It's really easy to find triplets because it always has the number 3 written inside or near a bracket. And as I said, they're always beamed together. Here, when we look at this, we see we have a triplet 16th notes, which means that you're playing 2 16th notes in the time of 3 16th notes. And we know that 2 16th notes are equal to an eighth note. Triplet eighth notes means that they're being played in the time of 2 eighth notes, which is the same as a quarter note. Triplet quarter notes are played in the time of 2 quarter notes or a half note. And triplet half notes are played in the time of 2 half notes, and they're the equivalent of a whole note. On this slide, we have some melodies that don't have any time signatures. Sometimes you will have to figure out what the time signature is. One of the things that's really going to help you is to look and see how the notes are grouped together. In the first example, the time signature would be 4/4. I'm going to play it for you, and I'll count it out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you figure out what the next one is? The second line? It's in 3/4, isn't it? I'll play it for you. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now the third example, it would be also in 4/4 time. If you said it was in 2/2 time, that would be perfect too. The first time I'm going to play this, I'm going to play it in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm going to play it as if it was in 2/2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Did you notice when I played it in 2/2, it sounded much faster? If you called this 2/2, it would be fine. If you called it 4/4, it would be correct as well. One of the other things in music that we really need to know is tempos and what the tempo terms are. So I put this here because I think it's important that we see how they connect together. Adagio, when you say it, adagio, sounds really slow. That's the slowest Italian term that we have right now. The next one is lento, which also means slow. Largo is slow and stately, and larghetto is slow and not as slow as largo. You might say to yourself, that's a little challenging to remember. Here's what I always use to remember it. Adagio is the slowest, and it starts with A. Then we have lento, which is slow, and then the LAs, the largo and larghetto. Then you can group andante and moderato together. Andante is at a walking pace, and moderato is at a moderate pace, but it's faster than andante. Moderato is in the middle between andante and allegretto, AMA. We have allegretto, which is rather lively and not as fast as allegro. Allegro is quick and lively. And then we have the two P's, presto, which is fast, and prestissimo, which is very fast. We've covered a fair amount of information today in how to use rests when you're working in simple time. We've talked about the grouping of rests. We've talked about triplets. We've talked about dotted notes. And we've talked about tied notes. Your assignment is to practice is adding rest to music and starting to figure out what some of the time signatures are. I hope you have a super duper week this week. Bye-bye.
It's music theory. Online, let's learn some theory. Online, by watching modules. Online, with music theory. Online.